The price of freedom is death. We're coming to get our check.
Back first, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to the Afro Elite YouTube channel, and I am your host, Afro Elite. And before we get started with all of this, please make sure that you guys have liked this channel. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, and shared it on your various social media platforms, because all of that helps the reach and the growth of the channel. All right. We have our brothers and sisters piling in here already. If it's a little laggy, let me know so I can try to fix that as soon as possible, because it was having a little bit of technical issues right before we got on. So if it's a little laggy, let me know. But hopefully we should all be good. I see D Jules in here, Reef in here, Day Dreaming in here. I appreciate every single last one of you all for being here, and all the people who are going to watch on the playback. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everybody who's been supporting the channel so far. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. I really am glad we're having this conversation, because this is something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. And now with Roland Martin doing an interview on this subject, it gives me the opportunity to really do a full breakdown and not have to go through a lot of paperwork. It's a very good opportunity for us to break this down, because since we're making this push for reparations, even on the local level, a lot of the, reparations talk, a lot of the people have been citing Evanston, and they're like, well, Evanston, they're doing reparations, or they're doing some form of reparations. And a lot of people are like, no, they're not doing reparations. What they're doing is not reparations. And it's been a lot of back and forth between what Evanston is doing, what they're not doing. Is it reparations? Is it not reparations? So this gives us the opportunity to really break that down, because we are pushing, or there's a lot of us pushing for local forms of reparations. And we're going to talk about that later. All right. So without any further ado, let's get started on the actual video at hand. But before we do that, let's make sure that we protect this channel. You guys know what that means. Copyright disclaimer. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Thank you very much. Before we get started, thank you, beloved, for the super sticker, the $9.99 super sticker. Thank you very much. Shout out to our sister Q2Ys. Thank you. I appreciate you. Let's get started. Hold on. Why is it? Okay. If it starts to act a little slow, y'all just let me know. But there shouldn't be oh boy, this should be a problem.
Years to black residents there. 4 years ago, Evanston, Illinois announced they were going to spend $10 million over 10 years to black residents there. The program would provide upwards of $25,000 housing grants for down payments, repairs of existing mortgages to atone for the city's past racial policies. Joining us right now is Robin Ruth Simmons. She's the founder and executive director of First Repair from Evanston.
Now, before we get started on this, I'd like for you all to know $25,000 for housing grants. That's not really a lot of money at all. Okay. $25,000 worth of housing grants is not, I mean, that's cool. That's not enough money to do anything. You can't buy a house with that money. And if you have a house, that's just allowing you to fix up small repairs to a degree. $25,000, that's not a lot of money. Okay. But we're going to continue because there's a lot we got to break down with this. So I'm trying to get to the real good part before I do a whole bunch of stopping and going, you know.
Now started.
Absolutely. Thank you, Roland, for having me. The program or the commitment to reparations has actually been implemented. Disbursements has happened. I want to add that in 2019, we did commit to seeding the work with $10 million initially from our recreational cannabis sales tax. And since then, we've added an additional $10 million from real estate transfer tax and are looking for additional revenue streams, as well as additional forms of repair, different remedies to implement. But to date, we have begun dispersing the $25,000 direct benefits to build wealth through home equity, as well as recently expanding our program to include cash benefits as an option. So over the last month that this has been an option, we have had more of our recipients select a cash benefit for their reparations.
That's what real reparations are. Cash benefits. That's what a real reparations agenda and a plan really is. Okay. Let's pause it right here. Let's really talk about it, okay? Because I want to do a very thorough breakdown of this. What they're implementing, now she's not going to really break this down, but what they're implementing is housing grants for a select amount of people who already own property in Evanston. This isn't for everybody who, you know, every black person, every FBA who lives in Evanston. This is only for a small amount of people who get selected to get housing grants. And that's why most of the people, now later on, she's going to talk about, oh, well, you know, most of the people said that they wanted housing grants later on. And we're going to talk about that. But the thing is that most of the people said that they wanted housing grants as opposed to nothing at all. No, when you ask a large population, in Evanston is not really a large population, but when you ask just black people, okay, would you rather have $25,000 specifically for a housing grant, a $25,000 housing grant, or would you like for me to just give you $25,000? Which one would you rather take? They would all say, oh, just give me the money. If I want to fix my house up with that, I can do that. If I wanted to fix my car, if I wanted to do whatever, I can do that. The thing is that when they presented the housing grants or whatever, they didn't present the $25,000 in cash as an option. Now that because of us, we're pushing the narrative that no, it has to be money. It has to be cash. Now that we're pushing that envelope forward, now it's forcing Evanston to kind of switch their plan up and make adjustments and updates to their plan. And now they're saying, okay, well, cash could be an option too. And overwhelmingly, the people in Evanston is all like, oh, well, if cash is on the table, we'll take that 10 times out of 10. So that's the situation that's really going on. All right. Let's continue, though.
What has been the response of residents? Do you have folks, granted the city council passed this, do you have folks who are opposing this, who still find this to be a bad idea with taxpayer funds?
Well, I'll say we have broad support in the city. The initial legislation passed in 2019 with an 8-1 vote. Future votes have passed either unanimously or 8-1. And you're never going to have 100% support. So we have some residents that early on felt very strongly that only cash is an appropriate form of repair. We have made that adjustment. And we have few that have spoken publicly about their disagreement to advance reparations with taxpayer dollars. But we do know that thought is out there. Overwhelmingly, we have support in our city from the ally community, of course, from the Black community to advance reparations. There is more question about forms of repair, urgency, amount, and so on. So we continue to work through the complicated process to implement reparations in Evanston.
Well, what do you make of folks like Sandy Darity? who claims that what you're doing there in Evanston, it's not reparations. You should not be calling it that.
Well, Sandy has an
Y'all
opinion
pay
about
attention to this
local
part.
reparations.
Let me just take it back a little bit, because this is where we're really going to start doing the breakdown. So let me take it back a little bit. Roland Martin said, what do you think about people like, and he mentioned Sandy Darity, but Sandy Darity is not the only one at all who's saying that this is not, I'm glad you caught that, allied community. That's non-black people. Okay, we're going to really do a very thorough analysis of this interview and of the Evenston agenda. But just pay attention to the question Roland Martin says. Okay, he asked, what do you think of people who say that this isn't real reparations?
Not reparations. You should not be calling it that.
Well, Sandy has an opinion about local reparations. And so it's not just Evanston specifically, but localities that are advancing reparations. I understand he's in disagreement with that only a federal legislation for reparations is appropriate. And it is important to note that in Evanston, as well as now over 100 cities that are advancing a local reparations initiative, and even and more states, that all of us share the North Star of a federal policy as a necessity for us to get to the full repair, get anywhere close to that number, because localities do not have the capacity to address the harms in Black communities. And we recognize that. So it's pretty much a false debate that local reparations is not reparations. In fact, it is reparations. It is a specific remedy in correlation to a direct harm to the Black community. It is not satisfying the reparations that we demand for the crimes of the transatlantic slave trade and other policy. But it is, in fact, reparations at a local level. It's going to be very different from city to city based on city history, capacity, and the ability to disperse and repair.
Now, gonna pause it right here, okay? Let's break that down. The thing is that she answered a part of it without answering the real question. Okay, and what does that mean? He said, okay, what do you think about people like Sandy Darity who say this isn't real reparations? That can be a loaded question, because there are some people who say reparations can only be federal. That's it. Now, Roland Martin's going to touch on that, so we're going to get to that in a moment. But the thing is, the reason why people say that what Evanston is doing is not, he's not FBA. Roland Martin's not FBA, exactly. The reason why people say what Evanston is doing is not real reparations is because of all of the stipulations that are in like the fine print, okay? All of the red tape that's in this whole Evanston reparations thing. First off, they're not directly giving cash. That's number one. Number one really is not lineage based, okay? It's not lineage based. That's the number one thing. Number two, they're not giving out any cash payments. They're only giving out housing grants. So they're restricting what you can do with the reparations, all right? So this isn't really like reparations in compared to all of the other forms of all of the other times. I mean, reparations has been dispersed throughout American history. This is why they're saying, and it's not really about slavery either, okay? It's not about slavery, okay? It's about like housing discrimination, which, okay, it's fine. All right, that's fine. But the thing is that when people say, the issue of people having the thing about Evanston is because Evanston is cited when we bring up reparations for slavery. We're bringing up reparations for a very specific incident that happened to a very specific people. And oftentimes when we have that conversation, people are like, oh, you mean like Evanston? You mean like how Evanston is doing it? And we're saying, no, that we're not trying to do anything at all like how Evanston is doing it. Evanston is on a completely different page. That's not what we're doing. the reason why people say that Evanston, Illinois, that's not real reparations is because we don't want to allow Evanston to become the blueprint for how we move reparations, how we move forward to reparations in the future. We don't want that to be the stepping stone of us getting reparations on the local or federal level. So that's why there's a pushback, because the thing is that the dominant society, they'll look at that, because you don't really see a lot of pushback when it comes to the Evanston reparations thing. Let's really let that soak in. You don't really see a lot of pushback. Now, when we talk about cut the check, when we talk about cash payments, there's a ton of pushback. There's a bunch of pushback. But surprisingly, or not surprisingly, really, Evanston reparations doesn't really seem to get a lot of pushback, and that seems to be much farther ahead than other local forms of reparations. For instance, like the California reparations, they're just forming a task force and they're getting way more pushback. Now we get California's a whole state versus Evanston, a small city, so we can understand, maybe the scale's a little different. But for instance, like California or other places that are talking about reparations getting a lot more pushback than Evanston, because what Evanston is doing is not really going to take anything away. They're like, oh, you give them housing grants, that's not going to be a problem. We don't really care if you give them housing grants. I mean, it is what it is. Okay, cool. So this is why a lot of people, now Roland Martin specifically brought up Sandy Darity, but this is why a lot of people are saying, hey, that's not real reparations, because we don't want that to be like, oh, okay, we'll give you reparations the same way Evanston gave their population reparations. This is why last week and next week, this is why we're forming community meetings, so we can talk about our own agenda, so we can, as grassroots, as the community, formulate our own agenda, and then that can be the agenda that's pushed forward, because there's a lot of agendas about, and they say reparations is the face of it, and then it's not really reparations when you actually start looking at the bills and the policies and the fine print. So this is why the community itself has to push forward and formulate their own agenda for reparations. All right, so that's why. But let's continue, because there's some more we got to break down.
Well, to your point, there was an Anscape article that was done, and this is what was actually discussed, and the question was asked, and he said, I think they created this. He says, I think they create an obstacle to a federal program because they are insufficient for meeting what we view as a primary goal of a reparations plan, which is to eliminate the racial wealth gap. And it says we estimate a conservative amount that would be required for Evanston to close the wealth gap for its Black residents will be at least $3 billion. The city's annual budget is about $360 million. They have a peculiar plan, which is really what we call a housing voucher plan, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so here's a perfect example that, to me, again, so Evanston makes this decision, and even he says that the city's annual budget is $360 million, but he's come up with $3 billion. Okay, the money got to come from somewhere.
Right.
And so if you have an annual budget of $360 million, and you're saying, well, we think it's going to take $3 billion, that means your budget, you're not going to even generate $3 billion for at least 10 years.
Right.
So,
right, for an entire budget.
So how in the world, so what? Does the city of Evanston go somewhere to borrow the $3 billion to give the Black folks? And I would think that if you have multiple programs in different cities, that's creating momentum for what you want on the federal level, because right now, ain't no federal program.
That's right. That's right. So here's a couple things. One is...
now, before let's get to what Roland Martin had to say about that. Here's the thing. Oh boy, here's the thing with that. I would say, it's crazy that Roland Martin's saying this, but I would say necessarily part of what he said, technically what he said was not wrong. That's not incorrect with what he said. Evanston doesn't have the funds to pay the reparations that we're looking for on the federal level. This is why everybody, and there's really no disagreement as far as reparations on the federal level, is certain people are like, no, we don't need to talk about local reparations. We just need to talk about federal reparations. That's the big thing, federal reparations. We have to understand that this is not an elevator. These are stairs. There are steps to this, okay? Reparations is an uphill battle, okay? So we got to take the steps. This isn't going to be just, bam, we just got it. We got to take the steps to it. This is why, like in Chicago, we're forming the meetings and everything like that, so it can be policies and agendas that are pushed forward on the local level. And when that starts to gain momentum, and when that starts to start formulating, then that stuff is going to go to the federal level. Because on the federal level, they're not really pushing reparations on the federal level whatsoever. And anytime they bring up the topic of reparations, they go to HR 40, which isn't reparations either. All right. So this is why, since we don't really have spokesmen on the federal level, this is why we do things on the local level, because this is what we can do on the local level. So we can do something to kind of get the ball rolling. And then once we do it, it will start to gain momentum, gain speed, gain power, and the movement will already have momentum for the federal level. Now, what's interesting about Roland Martin saying all of this is Roland Martin, first off, is not qualified for reparations, not slavery reparations. He's not qualified for that. Number two, Roland Martin has always been against reparations. Roland Martin has always made fun of people for reparations. Roland Martin has always said things like, oh, well, we can't do anything race-based. Oh, reparations is unfeasible. Oh, well, what about this? What about that? All right. Now he's trying to, I guess, now all of us within like the last couple years or so, now Roland Martin is sitting up there trying to act as if he's pushing forward a reparations agenda. Roland Martin has always been against the reparations agenda. Roland Martin was against the last year. I'm talking about literally last year when we had the reparations rally in DC. Roland Martin was sitting up there making fun of, oh, nobody's going to go to that. Nobody's going to go. That's a waste of time. You guys don't know what you're doing. So Roland Martin has always been against reparations. Now he's on this interview. Now he's sitting up there acting like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, don't you want it to be on the federal level? So doesn't it make sense to push the agenda on the local level so it can reach the federal level? Well, that's very interesting for Roland Martin to say, seeing as when we did have a rally in DC, not even a whole year ago, we had a rally in DC, and Roland, that's a local thing. That's on the ground level. It wasn't, we didn't go to the White House. Okay. That was something that the community came together and put together. And Roland was making fun of that. Roland said, oh, nobody's going to, which is not true. Roland said, nobody's going to that. Roland said, that's a waste of time, because that was right before the midterms. So, because Roland is a Democratic shill. So Roland is going to sit up there. Anything we do that's against the Democrats, Roland is going to act like that's not going to work. That's stupid. That's ridiculous. And you shouldn't do that. All right. So he's switching up. Now, before we continue, shout out to our good brother Black Logic for the $50 super chat. He says, great content, brother. Thank you very much. If you guys have not seen me and Black Logic's video collab that we did on affirmative action, where we broke down all of the data and statistics about how affirmative action actually benefits Asians more than they benefit us, you guys definitely want to see that. It's a very good and very educational broadcast that we did right there. Now, let's continue. Oh, but actually, let me add this. Shout out to Professor Black Truth. He did a broadcast, or he did like a mini series, not broadcast. He did like a mini series specifically about reparations and how slavery reparations pretty much started and was the genesis for all these other corporations and industries and businesses and all of that, right? and how all of that is tied to slavery. So we are owed, as foundational Black Americans, we're owed money from everybody, not just the federal government. So we talk about slavery reparations, but in all actuality, we're owed money from everybody. All of these banks, they owe money too. We can get reparations just from the banks alone. You know what I'm saying? Just from the insurance industries alone, just from Wall Street alone, all of the just from building the railroads. Now they try to give the credit to the Asians for doing that, but it was us who were doing that before them. And then when they were here, we were still doing that. You know what I'm saying? But we're owed reparations from everything and everywhere, because a lot of people like to mention the fact that, oh, well, you know, slavery, it was outlawed in the North. So how are you in a northern state asking for reparations in a northern state when slavery was outlawed? At a certain point in time, there was nowhere slavery was not outlawed. Okay, every American city had slavery at certain point in time. But the thing is, even the cities that outlawed slavery before 1865, all right, even those cities, they still benefited. That's the thing. They continue to, but they still benefited from slavery. All right. Take, for instance, Chicago, for example, and we've talked about this before. Chicago, even though they didn't have chattel slavery in Chicago at a certain point in time, they were still benefiting from that, because a lot of the cotton that was getting picked in the southern states, that was getting shipped on the railroads that we built, that was getting shipped to the factories in Chicago, because the Chicago was, you know, one of the places, Chicago, Detroit, and all the northern cities, they had all the factories and the machines and all that stuff. And they were making a lot of clothes that they were selling back down to the South or selling out across seas. They were making a lot of the material. Not only that, the sugar from the sugar canes, the tobacco, all of those things, they were processing and marketing off of those things from the free labor in the South. So just because the northern cities didn't technically have slavery does not mean that the northern cities weren't working hand in hand when it comes to slavery. Because a lot of times when we talk about reparations, they'll be all like, okay, well, only the people who actually own slaves should pay anything. And those were very few people. But the thing is that you didn't have to own a slave physically. You didn't have to physically own a slave or be a slave master to benefit and profit off of slavery. The entire country of the United States of America benefited and profited off of slavery. All right. So there's really no city that doesn't owe, to a degree. There's more cities that owe more money, to a degree, but every city owes money. All right. And shout out to McCoy23 for the $10 super sticker. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I greatly appreciate that. Thank you very much. All right. Exactly. Somebody's in the chat room. Exactly. Chase, Wells Fargo, Citizen Bank, all of these. And these are just banks. You can talk about banks. You can talk about hospitals. You can talk about schools. You can talk about insurance companies. You can talk about a lot. All of these things, they started with slavery, So and how many people made profits shipping slaves back down to the South? I mean, it really gets deep. But there's no place that really are like, oh, well, slavery, there was no slavery here, so we don't owe y'all nothing. No, it don't work like that. All right. Continuing.
That it's only the racial wealth gap that addresses repair. And so we do this work now full time in communities across the nation. Dozens I've been in personally. Black communities are not just looking at a cash benefit only, they're looking at full repair, a comprehensive approach to repair, which includes access to housing, business, education, health, police reform, clean air, and so on. We're looking for full repair under the 5 components of reparations. So first of all. Secondly, it is not only localities that are responsible for the harm. The conversation of reparations and contemporary history in 1989, Rep. John Conyers introduced HR 40. It's languished in Congress, but that doesn't mean that localities don't take a first tangible step in doing what they can do what is possible. And we have seen, as you have just stated, Roland, that momentum has happened. In 2019, it was only Evanston. Today, there are over 100 cities. In 2019, it was only 65 co-sponsors in the House for HR 40, and the last Congress ended with 219 co-sponsors and yes votes for HR 40, a Senate companion bill, hundreds of allies organizations that support reparations, and more momentum. The movement is being professionalized by foundations that are providing resources, funding, and other technical assistance so that we can get to liberation and repair in the Black community. So again, I just simply think it's a false debate to say that local reparations is not reparations. I do agree that local reparations alone is insufficient. And that's why I am encouraged to see that it's not just states or municipalities, it's now states. Look at the great work that's happening in California, the great work that's been introduced in the state of New York and Massachusetts. We see counties beginning to have the conversation on reparations, more and more institutions and industries. The academy has joined the case for reparations. And so like any other important public policy, federal public policy, when you think about school desegregation and fair housing and marriage equality and ban the box and even cannabis now being a federal conversation, it starts with a local spark, a grassroots leader, a municipal law, a state action, and then we get to a federal policy. And so I'm just encouraged and stand with all the other local leaders, stand with those that are working on local initiatives that we are making progress. And in Evanston, we are dispersing reparations.
Michael.
Hey, Robin, good to see you again.
Now, before we get into this guy, let me give exactly. Royal Me said exactly. Maryland had tobacco slaves and slash plantations. Okay, so like I was saying, everybody owes. Okay, there's no innocent party in America. Everybody owes. And our good brother, our brother Mike C, shout out to him for the $4.99 super chat. He says the North had hold on, what is it? I gotta read it on my phone. The North had indentured servers as slaves. California had the convict leasing program from 1852 to 1856. All right. Here's the thing, and convict leasing, that's slavery without really the official, that's slavery without chattel slavery. That's pretty much it. There was chattel slavery, and in 1865, that was the end of chattel slavery, and then it was state slavery. That's pretty much what it is. All right. So with the convict leasing program, that's slavery. The convict leasing program is state slavery. That's prison slavery. That's what that is. What they would do with the convict leasing program is, if you're Black, they'll just, I'm white and I say so, and find a reason to lock you up. And then when they lock you up, because the plantation owners still needed slaves, they were all like, okay, well, you can just lease the prisoners slaves, because the 13th Amendment says that they're technically slaves again. And they did that on purpose. That was not accidental at all, which is why they haven't changed it. All right. Because, you know, there are slaves. You can just pay us and we'll give them to you. And then they can, pick the cotton again. They can, do what you need them to do. And then you give them back. That's still that's slavery. Do you know in slavery, right? Before, and this was before 1865, they used to lease slaves. And this is why we don't really buy by the argument that everybody wasn't a slave owner. Well, no, everybody didn't have to own a slave. The only people who owned a large amount of slaves were the people who had a lot of property where they would utilize slaves. and they could afford to, you know, keep the slaves and keep the crops and all that. What other people would do was sometimes they couldn't own slaves. They didn't have really the property to really own us, to market off of owning slaves. So what they would do is they would lease slaves. They don't really talk about that part, but if, for instance, George Washington, because we know he owned a lot of slaves. If George Washington, he had hundreds of slaves, you'd be like, oh, well, let me grab a dozen slaves from you for the summer while they're working on my field, and then I'll give them back. Now, I don't own the slave technically. They're still the property of George Washington, and I'm just using him as an example because we know he owned a lot of slaves. They're still his property, so I'm not really a slave owner, but for right now, until whatever the end of our contract is, I can use these slaves. Like leasing a car. You don't own the car, but you still have access to the car for however long you're leasing the car. And I'm saying this to say, just because they try to minimize slavery by saying only a few people own slaves. No, a lot of people participated in slavery, and this all goes back to everybody had their hand in it. There were some people like George Washington who had hundreds of slaves, a bunch of land, and people like him, the big slave owners. And then there were smaller, lower level slave owners, people who were just leasing slaves here and there. And then there were people who were still, even if they never leased a slave or had anything to do with a slave, they were still benefiting off of the product, the cotton, the tobacco, the sugar, and the buildings that the slaves were fixing and building. You know what I'm saying? So everybody has something to pay. Everybody owes something. All right. Now let's get into it. And shout out to him again for the second $4.99 super chat. Thank you very much, Mike. Thomas Jefferson, exactly. Thomas Jefferson owned a lot of slaves. All right, all of them did. All of them at that time did. Okay, let's continue.
Hey, how
Congratulations.
Are you?
I'm all right.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the documentary. For those that don't know, I interviewed Robin 2 years ago on the African History Network show. So it's great that this is paying out. I know there's a lot of hard work. When we talked, one of the things we talked about is how Evanston, Illinois did not have a history of slavery. And there were so many reparations reactionaries out here attacking what you were doing and what the city council was doing. Can you talk some about that, why you chose the housing vouchers as opposed to quote unquote reparations for slavery? And then also there was a 70-page study that was produced that preceded the recommendations, the policies that you all did. Talk about why was that 70-page study? Because you have so many hashtag cut the check people out here saying we don't need a study, just cut the check. Can you address that, please?
Now, this man goes on to talking about, oh yeah, Evanston, and this is exactly why I started before he even started speaking. I already debunked what he was talking about because he's all like, well, Evanston doesn't have a history of slavery. Evanston doesn't necessarily have to have a history of slavery, okay? The reason why certain states didn't really have slavery like that is because certain states didn't have the land, the plantations that for the slaves to work on and everything. So what those cities and states would do, they would market off of slavery in a different form. Okay, the whole state of Illinois marketed off of slavery in a different form. They didn't have to have plantations. They didn't have to have cotton plantations up in the north to still participate and have a tie to the South slavery, the slavery in the South. All right, so that's debunked already. And then he's talking about, oh yeah, so talk about why you decided to do the housing voucher over the hashtag cut the check, because there's a lot of hashtag, and when he's talking about us, that's who he's talking about. It's a lot of hashtag cut the check people out there. So why don't you and he's referring to us. Why don't you talk about that? Because they say we don't need a study, just cut the check. Okay. What we're saying is no, we don't need a study. We don't need a study the same way Ukraine doesn't need a study. The same way these immigrants don't need a study. We're not going to play this dumbass game where it's like, hey, y'all just don't understand, because they've been doing that. Let me do this for a little. They've been pulling that game for the longest time. All right. They've been pulling the game of y'all just don't understand how politics work. It just don't work like that. We just can't do it like that, guys. We can't just snap our fingers and make things appear. We can't just do it like that. That's not how you got to go through studies, and you got to go through policies and a filibuster. And it's way more complicated than you guys might think it is. You guys are stupid. That's what it is. That's what your problem is. You're stupid. You don't understand. But they're giving money and cutting the check. Joe Biden got a stack full of executive orders. He's all like, I don't know what I'm signing. I'm just putting my name on everything. He's doing that when it comes to everybody else, but only when it comes to us is it. Well, we can't do nothing without a study. And here's the thing. Here is the thing when it comes to HR 40, which is the study. Here's the thing when it comes to HR 40. HR 40, they're not even really pushing HR 40. They talk about, oh, well, we need HR 40 first. That's a start. Everything has to have a start. It has to have a beginning, but they don't really push HR 40. HR 40 has been sitting up there floating around in Congress, loosely, vaguely, only rarely being discussed every so often. Even if they honestly believed that in order to get reparations on a federal level, the first thing they have to do is pass HR 40. If they honestly believe HR 40 is the only way we can start having the real conversation about reparations, why are they not even really heavily pushing HR 40? The only time you hear them talk about HR 40 is when we bring up the topic of reparations, when somebody from the grassroots brings up the topic of reparations. This is how you know they don't want nothing. They don't even want HR 40, okay? They don't want anything at all, because when it comes to other groups of people, they'll bring that up of their own volition. When it comes to other people getting checks, they'll bring the subject up. When it comes to other people getting money, they'll bring the subject up. When it comes to us getting reparations, they don't bring the subject up. They don't go to the people and ask the people, well, what do you think about HR 40? Well, don't you want to vote for it? When they talk about voting for issues, they talk about voting for issues for everybody else, for everything else. They don't really bring up HR 40 when it comes to voting for issues or on their policy. They don't put that at the face of their policy on their websites or anything. The only time it's brought up is when they're forced to answer the question about reparations. This is how you know they don't want to move the needle as far as reparations at all. They don't want to do that at all. All right. Let's continue, though.
Absolutely. So first of all, it's important to know that one of the most important practices of reparations is that the harm community, the Black community, is really prescribing what redress looks like. And it's important to know that the Evanston Black community went through a process in 2019 where we heard and by consensus move forward with prioritizing housing. Now, as you mentioned, that report.
Now, here's the thing. She just said, listen to the doublespeak. Okay, because she said earlier in this very broadcast that because of the topic of direct cash payments, most of the people are opting for the direct cash payments. Okay, then she's saying, oh, in 2019 there was a study done or some type of thing or poll or whatever done, and people opted for the housing vouchers. Okay, well, the thing is that you have to be you have to pay very close attention, because what were the people's options? If the people said, hey, you're not getting anything, but we can't give you housing vouchers, the people are like, oh, well, I mean, I guess housing vouchers versus anything, I'd take the housing vouchers. But she said earlier, when people had a choice, now that the conversation about cash payments are around the table, now that that's circulating around the nation, people are like, hey, let's not do the housing vouchers, let's do the cash. Most of the people are opting for the cash. So really she told on herself, because what she's saying is that in 2019, it wasn't a poll saying, do you want cash or do you want a housing voucher? And people chose the housing voucher. What pretty much what she's saying, without saying it, is that in 2019, cash was not on the table. And people chose what they felt that they can get. All right. That's really what it is.
Complemented the demand from the community. The report was done by Shorefront Legacy Center, led by Dino Robinson and his colleagues, and it showed anti-Black housing practices, zoning laws, housing policy that is responsible for stripping away wealth and opportunity in Black Evanston, and is responsible for our current racial segregation today. I live in the west end of the 5th Ward. I served as councilwoman here for 4 years. It's still the most concentrated Black community. Also, most concentrated disinvestment in everything, least community amenities, no neighborhood school, no walkable access to healthy foods, air quality issues, deteriorating housing stocks. The list goes on, and our story in Evanston is like every other city in America, and that's why local reparations. But thirdly, it's important to know that this is not a slavery reparations. This is not to compete with the demands for HR 40. This is specific to the business and anti-Blackness of Evanston. And our legal counsel, our corporation counsel, Nick Cummings, and his supporters and his partners, including Professor Justin Hansford from Thurgood Marshall School at Howard Law School, came up with a legal framework, one that was viable, so that we could move past just the demand and the case for reparation, which we've been stuck in for so long, and get into implementation and disbursement. And so that legal framework was really key in us having a strong case, one that was withstand legal challenges, which we've had from conservative groups from outside of Evanston, from Texas and DC. They have tried to challenge our work, but our work is very thoughtful, it's very smart, it's careful, it's narrowly tailored. It includes a home rule municipality. We're using home rule taxes, so we're not using federal dollars that are being passed down and have to deal with blocks from other courts outside of Evanston. We are leading within our values. It is possible for other localities to do the same. And that's how we got to housing. In a long story, that's how we got to housing. The community informed it and prescribed it. The case for reparations was rooted in housing, and the legal framework supported a remedy in direct correlation to the harm, which in the case of Evanston is largely based on housing.
All right, thank you.
Now, okay. Okay. Before we continue, let me give a credit to Tell It Like It Is for the 1999 super chat. Thank you very much, brother. He says the entire U.S. economy was propped up, stabilized of slave labor. Exactly. All of it, 100%. Okay. There's nowhere in the world that didn't benefit to a degree. All right. Then he continues to say, hell, there was a slave market in Washington, D.C., where Selman Northrop was kidnapped. There was. They were just even listen, and thank you very much for that. Let me touch on that. There were freed people, there were freedmen around who were not property of a slave master. They were free at the time. For instance, if you guys, what's that movie? 12 Years a Slave. They talk about that, and that happened way more frequently than is discussed. That would happen to where, you're a freed Black person during the time of slavery, but you managed to find your way to freedom, so you're free. You're legally not a slave, and then somebody can be all like, hey, that's my slave. He's lying. He's not free. He belongs to me. And you just go with him. They would just be all like, oh, okay. Well, off to the plantation you go. Just like with 12 Years a Slave, they would just kidnap Black people, even who were free. So this is why we don't really put too much emphasis on there were free states, because the free states didn't offer any protection to the the freedmen. They didn't offer any protection to the freed black people of that time. You know, they would go up to the South, they would go up there, and then somebody, a slave catcher would just be, or a plantation owner, they'd be able to come up there and be all like, hey, that slave, that Negro belongs to me. I'm like, oh, really? Okay, we'll take him. And they would just have to go. And or they would have to go and fight or something. That would happen often. So we're not going to pretend like the northern states were some type of safe haven for black people, for Foundation Black Americans, because they weren't. All right. Now, here's the thing, what she was talking about as far as the Evanston and the reparations. Let's be very clear with this. Outside, let's put a pin in the slavery conversation. Outside of slavery, there was still so much racism and discrimination that we faced that we're owed reparations for in and of itself. Okay, as far as the Jim Crow, as far as the Highway Act, as far as redlining. If you want to give black people reparations specifically for redlining, I don't even have a problem with that. Now, what we're doing, what the movement is doing is they're fighting for reparations for slavery, all right, for American chattel slavery. But if there's another program that's all like, you know what we can do, what we can fight for is reparations for redlining. I feel like we are owed reparations for redlining. I don't have a problem with reparations for redlining. I don't see why that would be a problem. The issue is the fact that they're not specifying that this is reparations not for slavery. They're marketing this as just reparations. They're not specifying that this is reparations for redlining. So the thing is that when we're having our push for slavery reparations, our movement, which she just said is separate from what she's doing, our movement is getting tied into what she's doing. When we talk about, oh, we want slavery reparations, they're like, oh, well, look at what Evenston is doing. That's a form of reparations, which is flawed in and of itself. But that's a form of reparations. No, that's not at all what we're doing. Their mission, their agenda, their basis, and their reasonings are completely different from what we're doing. So to a degree, because of the looseness, because what she's doing is not specified, that it's not about slavery, it's getting tied in and mixed in, and it's sowing seeds of confusion about what reparations really is. All right, then let's get back to the cash part. If you were in an accident, you had insurance, the other person had insurance, and they were texting on their phone, they ran a stop sign or whatever the case, and they hit your car, messed it up, all right, totaled the car, all right, the car's gone. Their insurance has to pay you a check. Now, with that check, most likely, you would get another car with that check. But the thing is, you don't have to get another car with that check. What the insurance is supposed to do, because they hit your car, they give you the check and you use that check to get another car. But you do what you want with that check. Even if 9 times out of 10, you're going to use that check to get another car, you still have to have the option to get another car with the check. That's the way insurance will work. The insurance doesn't give you another car. They give you the check and you get another car if that's what you choose to do with the check. That's the way reparations work. Okay, so if you really want to properly talk about redlining reparations, which is what she's really talking about, or housing discrimination reparations, if you really want to talk about it, just give them the check. And if they want to do something with their house, they can do that. All right. Don't say we're just going to give you housing vouchers and you can do whatever you want as long as it's within this limitation in this box that we have put on you. No, give me the check. There's no box. There's no limitation. There's no stipulations with what I can do with it. And if I decide to do something with my house, I'll do that. If I decide to do something with my business, I'll do that. If I decide to just save it, invest, whatever, I can do that. That's the way it's supposed to work. All right. Let's continue though.
Matt.
Yeah, so Robin, thanks for joining us this evening. I think this is a brilliant program, and I'm really glad to hear Justin Hansford from Howard Law School is involved, and I'm not surprised at the brilliance of this program. But I did have two questions, and the first is, how did y'all decide on how to determine when harm ended for eligibility purposes? I saw it was between 1919 and 1969, but obviously there are a lot of pervasive effects that continue on to today. So how did you decide to cordon that off? And how does the eligibility work as it relates to descendants of people who experienced that, number one? And the second question was, I think it's genius that it's tied to the recreational marijuana taxation that the city does, right? So what has been the buy-in, if any, from cannabis groups across the country as it relates to that, and that potentially being used as a vehicle to fund other reparations programs? Because there's obviously a justice component with that in terms of how many people over the years were convicted of something that's now legal. So if you would you address those two issues, please?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So first, in terms of eligibility, we looked at the harm. It was very specific and measurable. It was a zoning law that was enforced and implemented between 1919 and 1969. It was implemented until fair housing was passed federally. So we are looking at everybody Black in Evanston that lived here between 1919 and 1969 had a direct harm, and their descendants were harmed as a result of the direct harm of their elders and ancestors. And so that's how we framed our eligibility. We didn't look at neighborhood or census tract. We didn't look at lineage. In fact, in Evanston, I can speak for Evanston. I know that there is a very passionate lineage conversation across the nation, but in our case, during our period of harm, the whole diaspora was here. We're a very diverse Black community. One of our biggest reparations leaders is a Haitian immigrant. So we have a harm that is defined in that period of 50 years, and direct descendants are eligible. And right now we have started with prioritizing the elders, who in the program language are classified as ancestors. So those that had direct harm at the point of disbursement, those were about 70 years old and older, receive their reparations benefit first. First of all, because they experienced the direct harm. And secondly, because we want to make sure we get to repair as soon as possible for those that may transition. And unfortunately, we've had some of our reparations eligible community members transition during this time. To address that, we have allowed all of the applicants to name a beneficiary in the event they transition before their reparations benefit is dispersed. In the event that they didn't do that, and we've had about a handful of cases where they didn't name a beneficiary, then that benefit goes to the estate. And either the estate has decided who is a beneficiary, or that will happen through some form of probate court. But this is a benefit that belongs to the estate, the family, and it is intended to build generational wealth for families. And so that explains our eligibility. We had 640 applications come in on our first round of the application being open. 140 of them classified or qualified under that ancestor, or they were the elders that had direct harm. And the balance of them are, like myself, descendants. And then as it relates to your question regarding
before we do that, before she gets on to the cannabis part, let's address what she was talking about when it comes to who qualifies. This is why it is important for us to make sure that our things are completely separated. Because number one, she said it herself, it's not lineage based. People, we have to understand exactly why it is so important for the reparations to be lineage based. We have to understand that, because when it's not lineage based, it's going to weaken the foundation and the basis of our claim. Okay, we are claiming that we have our specific lineage has been harmed, our specific lineage has been aggrieved, and we need compensatory justice for our specific lineage. All right, now we understand that there's issues going on with our connection to the diaspora, but let's pretend, for the sake of the argument, let's pretend that that does not exist. Let's pretend that we have the closest, strongest ties with every ethnic group in the diaspora. Even if we did, we're still going to have the reparations be lineage based. Lineage based reparations is not because we have issues with the diaspora, whether we were inseparable or whether we're at war with each other. Our reparations still has to be lineage based. Just like if we were super close with Haiti, I can't go to Haiti and say France owes me money just like the Haitians. Because I'm not Haitian. I can't do that. And it doesn't matter how close we might be. They might consider me to be family. And that's cool. And that's great. But I don't get to get in on their reparations. Their reparations would still be lineage based. Okay. It would be based off their ethnicity and lineage. So this is why we have to have that. Because some people are like, oh, that's divisive. Oh, you're doing it because you don't like this, is xenophobic. Is not about that. This is about business in law. All right. That's what this is about. This ain't about, I don't like you. I don't like the food you eat. I don't like the music you listen to, so you can't get it. It's not about that at all. Now, we do have, of course, we know we do have issues going on with the diaspora and Pan-Africanism. But regardless of that, if Pan-Africanism was the mentality we were all on, we would still have to have our lineage-based reparations, okay? That's the only way it can work. Why? Why is it so important to have that? Is because in America, you can't have race-based exclusive things. That means you can't say, you're getting it if you're black, and nobody else can get it if they're not black. Only black people can get it. America has outlawed that. So that's why it's not going to work legally anyway. And then from even if that wasn't the law, from a arguable standpoint, because we want this to be airtight. If you say, okay, well, we're just going to do reparations for essentially housing discrimination, but we're going to give it to black people. Okay. You're going to have a bunch of Hispanics pop up and be all like, oh, whoa. How are you just going to give them reparations for housing? My people face housing discrimination. How are you going to say they can get it because they're black and I can't get it? Now, they won't be able to say that if it's lineage based, but if it's race based, it takes away a barrier, a very important barrier that we need so other people can't crowbar their way into our reparations. So once you remove that barrier away, it's the lineage barrier. Once you remove the lineage barrier and take that out of the conversation, then other people can legitimately, not really legitimately, but they can legally, and they do have some stance to make the argument, okay, well, where's my money too? I've been discriminated. How are you going to just give discrimination policies away just cause he moved? Because what they'll do is they'll be all like, okay, you guys are first and second generation Nigerians and y'all getting this, but my family, we've been here from the 1960s. Y'all got here in the 2000s. So how are y'all getting that before me? That's the argument that they would make. You have to have foresight. You have to see that. The argument that they would make is, oh, well, the Hispanics, the Puerto Ricans, they've been here longer than a lot of the African and Caribbean immigrants have. So we can't give black people anything. We got to include them. But hold on. Asians, they've been here longer than the Puerto Ricans have been here. we gotta give the Asians something too. But whoa, hold on. But the Italians, hold on, they were discriminated. We gotta cut something off for the Italians. You gotta do that. Oh, wait. But what about the Irish? They were indentured servants too. You can't leave them. That's the argument that they would make. They would be making that argument. Hold on. So that's why it has to specifically, exactly, the people of color thing. It has to specifically stay lineage based. All right. Because if you do, you're going to really mess up the whole pot. And the thing is that we're not going to be having chances and chances and chances and chances to go back and redo and go back and redo. Okay. So the thing is that we're not going to try to mess it up, then fix the mistakes and come back again. So we want to get it done right now, right the first time. All right. Now, but let me see. Before we get started, let me check something out. Let's just finish. Let's just wrap this up real quick. Just wrap this up real quick.
Sales tax and revenue, absolutely. The cannabis law, even written in Illinois, had language about reparative justice and even reparations, but it was more so as it relates to dispensaries and the business of cannabis, the industry of cannabis. And we thought it important in Evanston that we also look at those revenues, that wealth that's being generated from an industry that has harmed our community. In Evanston, 71% of the marijuana arrests were in the Black community, and we are only about 14, 15% of the population. So there was a clear issue of harm as it relates to over-policing and cannabis in Evanston. Mm-hmm. We had 100% consensus that we do use the cannabis sales tax to initiate our reparations. Okay,
that's pretty much it. Because after that, Roland Martin, he pretty much ends it. That's why he's like, got it. Because I guess he's being told by his supporters to kind of wrap it up. All right. So we're gonna pause that. We're gonna get rid of that. Before we continue, thank you very much, YGLTB1 for the 1999 super chat. I appreciate you, fam. Thank you very much. He says, B1 family, B1 to you, says we cannot allow these compromising Miliquos, I think this Miliquos buck broken tap dancing ninjas, smart word, ninjas lead the reparations conversation. By the time the discussion are over it, it says they'll have us getting gift certificates to Chipotle. That's a good point. That's a good point, because the thing is that they'll be all like, well, that's kind of unfeasible. I mean, we've had food crisis. You know, we have food deserts in the community. So a form of reparations can kind of really be like, you know, a gift card to Whole Food store. Really, you know, how about we? No, actually, how about we just ship you apples and oranges? That's kind of reparations. You know, because back in the day, we were discriminated from going to certain stores. So because of segregation, so instead, we'll just ship you apples and oranges as a form of reparations. That they will water it down to that. All right. They'll water it down to that level. This is why we can't let them come up with the agenda. This is why we're doing what we're doing in Chicago, because we all like, hey, we got to. As far as letting them do what they're doing and trying to piggyback off of their momentum and what they're doing, we can't allow that to go on anymore. So we're like, you know what? We got to come up with our own thing. Now, Roland Martin, he's not going to push back against this because this is not lineage based. Roland Martin is a Haitian. So Roland Martin's not going to push back against this. This is why you have to wonder, when it comes to anything that legitimately is going to benefit Black people, is going to close that wealth gap, is going to help and empower Black society, there is always pushback from everybody. Everybody has some form of pushback all the time. So why, when it comes to Evanston Reparations, which is what they're citing, is what kind of started the whole reparations, well, not really started, but it was the first local-based program to get the ball rolling as far as local reparations are concerned. Okay, they cite Evanston for that. So if Evanston is the one that started all of that, why do you see such little pushback when it comes to Evanston? And you see such little pushback when it comes to Evanston because they don't have a problem with what Evanston is doing. They don't have a problem because what Evanston is doing isn't going to really help anything. It's cool, I guess, but it's not going to really help anything. What is $2,500? What is $25,000 gonna help? What's $25,000 going to help when it comes to generational wealth? She talked about generational wealth. That's not going to help. Now, first off, who qualifies? And not only there is it $25,000 when it comes to specifically reparations. All right, it's not going to. You still have to have people to qualify for that. So it's not like, oh, I'm black, I can prove I've been here for this amount of time, so here's the check. You still got to go through a process where they vet you and approve that you get that money. You know what I'm saying? There's a large racial wealth gap. Okay, that's only increasing. It's only getting bigger. All right, wealth is something that is not stagnant. Stagnant means it stays still, doesn't move. Wealth is not like that. Wealth either goes up or wealth comes down. All right. During slavery, they were able to accumulate and form wealth based off of our free labor. Nothing has stopped them. Nothing has prevented them from gaining more wealth since that time. All right. They have not only the ones who actually have the wealth, they have access to wealth and other policies. Okay. They have privilege. Okay. So black people, when we were allowed to have businesses and Wall Streets and stuff like that, that stuff was burned down. That stuff was taken away from us through eminent domain. That stuff was sabotaged. That stuff was sabotage when it comes to the Highway Act, when it comes to redlining, when it comes to loan discrimination, when it comes to vandalism, when it comes to a lot of these things. That stuff was sabotaged. All right. There was a time when like in the Jim Crow era, they would just hang black businesses, black people who own black businesses. They would just hang them. This is one of the reasons why you saw so many black people, when you would see them hanging, a lot of pictures, you would see them hanging and they would be wearing suits and ties, and they be looking like they dress nice. They would hang them in suits and ties. A lot of those people were black business owners. They would just be, if a shout out to our brother Torian Rain, because he talks about this in his massacre series. A lot of the black massacres that started because of the hatred and vitriol they had when it came to black business owners. All right. Anytime black business owners were really getting successful, or a black neighborhood was really starting to get successful, they were, we got to get rid of it. We have to sabotage this, which is really the real reason they did it with Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was they said it was because some white girl or whatever. That's not really the real reason. The real reason is because Tulsa, Oklahoma was popping and they were hating on that. All right. And that's the reason for a lot of the massacres. Okay. So shout out to Torian for that. All right. So we've always had blockades. We've always had obstacles. We've always had people stealing and stripping and putting barriers and holes and stuff like that to take our wealth away. And there's nothing that has stopped them from gaining wealth. All right. So there's this huge gap between wealth. in the white society and black society. All right. So what we need is compensatory justice. That means, okay, since we were the ones who are harmed specifically when it comes to wealth, when it comes to businesses, when it comes to owning land and property, which is how a lot of them started really gaining wealth in the first place, because a lot of them, there was a large amount of white people who didn't have wealth at a certain point in time. All right. All white people were not rich. Now, they had more access to wealth than we did, more access to capital than we did, but they were not all rich. What really gave them the big boost is when they started giving out the GI Bill, and they started giving them houses and started making certain housing and land and stuff like that affordable. When they went with the what's that thing called? I'm forgetting it. I apologize. What's the thing? The Homestead Act. When they did the Homestead Act, and they were just inviting white immigrants, European immigrants, to come over here, and they was like, here's the house here, and they would, and because they had land that they owned, they were able to pass that down and gain wealth off that, right? We never had any access to that, and the second we started gaining wealth, they would take it away, just like Bruce's Beach, you know. They would take that stuff away from us, and that's not nearly the only example, but they would take that away from us. So there's this huge gap. So in order to fix this huge gap, you're going to need a very substantial boost, a very realistic compensatory boost in wealth, in not just wealth, money, revenue, access to capital that we were stripped from. All right. $2,500. Now, I get Evanston's not no super big city. It's not Chicago. It's not New York. $2,500 is not really going to do anything. Even to the people who qualify, which isn't everybody, but even to the people who qualify. And the thing is, in order to qualify, you have to own a house. It's not like I can qualify and I can buy a house with that, or I can use that to put as a down payment for a house. You have to already own a house to even get the check for that. You know what I'm saying? Or like your parents or something, they have to own a house for them to give you the check, or to some degree like that. So this is when you look at the amount of damage that is being done, and then you compare that to the amount of repair and recovery that is being done, it's not proportionate. And if it's a disproportionate amount of damage in comparison to the amount of recovery and repair, the damage is going to overwhelm the recovery and repair, and it's still going to be at this damaged state. This is why a lot of people are pushing back against citing Evanston as the blueprint for local reparations, because it shouldn't be. Because when we allow Evanston, because I promise you, when we allow Evanston to become the blueprint for local reparations, we're going to get a whole bunch of stuff passed. They're going to be like, oh, thank God. Thank you so very much. Okay, fine. You want to do it like Evanston? We have no problem. They'll do it and be all like, now you can never really come back. Or if you do, it's going to be so hard. I'm personally not going to even say the word never. It's going to be so hard to damn near impossible for you all to come back now, because we'll be all like, well, we gave y'all reparations. We gave you what you said you wanted. Y'all said y'all wanted it to be like Evanston. We did it like Evanston. Hold on. You can't say we did you wrong. We gave you what you wanted. This is what you wanted. See, this is why it's important to know history. This is what they did when it came to the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement started because of the fact that the black population was disproportionately being targeted and disenfranchised when it came to wealth, resources, access to capital, access to education, and so on and so forth, employment, so on and so forth, right? So instead of giving, because it started from like black people like, hey, they said separate but equal, but we're not separate but equal. You guys are breaking off majority of the resources over on that side of town, but on the black side of town, we're not getting anything. If we're separate but equal, you got to break it up and give us what you're giving them. It started like that. It got switched around, and they was all like, you know what? Instead of separate but equal, what we'll do is we'll just take the barrier off and we'll give you guys integration. And they allowed enough, because all black people weren't in on it, they allowed enough black people to be all like, oh, okay, integration, that's cool. That'll solve the problem. Integration will solve the problem. So with integration, a lot of black people, including Dr. King himself, said, hey, this was not the outcome that we were supposed to get. This was a bad idea. We shouldn't have went down this road. This is why he said he felt like he led his people into a burning building, because he's all like, hey, we were better off before. This is a worse outcome than what we had, okay? But the thing is that they'll trick you into making you believe that you want something when they already know the outcome if they give that to you. So they're like, oh, you want that? Oh, yeah, okay. If you want integration, I guess. And then when you get integration, things get worse. And they'll be like, oh, well, what you guys said you wanted integration. That's what you get. They'll trick you into making you think that you want something that they know is going to hurt you. That's the thing. This is why it's important for us to formulate our own reparations agenda and not cite, piggyback, or use Evanston as the basis going forward when it comes to local reparations. That's why. Because if we do it like Evanston, first, it'll get passed because nobody has a problem with Evanston. Nobody. They have a problem with direct cash payments because Evanston's not talking like that. First off, Evanston's not doing lineage base, so we know everybody's like, oh my God, because that's the main thing. The main thing that they're having a problem with is because it's lineage based. I promise you guys, if we were to take that lineage based barrier off the table, and we say, you know what, we're just giving reparation for black people, okay? But it's not exclusively about lineage. Everybody would love it. Why? Why would everybody love it? People would love it because they know in the long term, down the road, oh, this is going to hurt them way more than it's going to benefit them. Okay, all right. They would do that because they're thinking about the long game. They're thinking 2-3 steps ahead of what they would want us to be thinking. So they are, oh, okay. It's like chess. Sometimes you can't just think about the move you're going to make. You have to think about the move you're going to make, the move they're going to make, then the move you're going to make. You know what I'm saying? You always got to be thinking like that. So they're thinking like that. So if we make the checkers move, which was to cite Evanston and use Evanston, if we make that move, they're going to use the chess move and approve it and be like, good, okay? Now you guys can't say that we didn't give you guys reparations. You can't say that, okay? Now these other immigrants, now they get to get it, but we can't stop with them legally. We can't stop with them. The Asians, they got to get it too. The Hispanics, they got to get it too. Poor whites, they got to get it too. All people of color, they got to get it too. Oh, well, how are you going to discriminate? White men, they got to get it too. Next thing you know, Donald Trump will be getting reparations if we allow it to go down that road. This is why we can't do that. All right. This is why it has to stay the way the community needs it to stay. You know, that's why it has to stay that way. So this is why we're formulating our own plan. This is why we're not sitting up there looking at their plans and being all like, I guess it's better than nothing, which is really what happened in Evanston in the first place. What happened with Evanston is not like they had a community town hall meeting. They had historians and economists. They didn't have experts like Dr. Claude Anderson to come on there and talk about reparations. They didn't really have that. They came up, it was a select amount of people who came up with a policy, and they was all like, hey, y'all like this? It's better than nothing, right? And then there was some people in Evanston like, hey, well, I mean, I guess it's better than nothing. Like, okay, cool. And then they're going to get in front of the camera and be all like, hey, well, the people said this is what they wanted. Well, yeah, because you didn't give them a better option. And now they're having an issue because now there's a national conversation about reparations when it comes to cash payments. And now Evanston is looking like, oh, hold on now. Y'all didn't let us know that was on the table. Now that because we didn't even think that far ahead. Now that, because unfortunately, what they really did is they targeted a lot of senior citizens with that, you know. So they are like, hey, it's better than nothing, right? And now that they're seeing that there's a whole national conversation and a lot of people are saying no, cash, they all like, hey, whoa, let's redo this thing. Hold on now, let's redo this. Y'all talking about a housing grant, that's cool if comparison to nothing. But once we see that cash is an option, I'm always take the cash. That's the thing. So they're having their own problem in and of itself. Okay. Because when they first started, they was all like, oh, no, we're not going to do cash. And on their website, they're all like, oh, well, we don't want to do cash because that'll be taxed, you know, and they won't really benefit from cash. But if we give them housing grants, that can't be taxed. So, you know, they'll have more out of it. They'll get more juice out of that than they would out of cash. So that's the reason, which don't make sense. That's not true. That don't make no damn sense. But okay. But this is why it's important for us to formulate that, because the thing is that if we allow them to, they understand, because they're just minions of the dominant society. So they understand, and I say they, I mean the dominant society, they understand this, they're playing the long game with this. They want us as the collective of Black society to sign on to what they're proposing. And their proposal always has something in the fine print, something written in between the lines, some form of agenda written in the words, a word salad with some little agenda in there that if we just, oh, it's better than nothing, and we sign it, they'll be like, got you, you're done. You are done. This is it. This is exactly what we want. And we'll be in a worse position than we were had we not signed that, just like with integration. So it's important that we understand the mistakes that were made in the past so we don't make those mistakes going forward in the future. Okay. The mistake we made in the past with integration is the fact that they proposed that and we looked and we said, okay, well, I mean, it looks like a fix. So we'll take that. Now, in modern society, modern Black society, we're not saying, okay, that looks like a fix, so we'll take it. We'll be like, no, you're going to fix it the way we tell you to fix it. That's what we're doing. All right. Let me pull up this real quick because and shout out to everybody last week who came to the meeting that we had in Chicago. But we're having that again. I want to show you guys the flyer for that. All right. We're having that again next weekend. All right. It's in the same location. All right. This is the address. It's Saturday, which is next Saturday, which is the 29th from 1 p.m. to 3:30. All right. So we're going to be essentially continuing the conversation that we had about reparations and kind of moving forward with the agenda and formulating a cohesive, digestible, realistic agenda that is compensatory to the damage that has been done. That's what we're going to be That's what we're going to be doing. All right. So shout out to everybody who made it last time. I know there was because last time we had it Friday and it was earlier. So some people were just getting there right off work, you know, and they were like, damn, man, I missed it. They were literally, as we were wrapping up, there was folks literally still coming. I was like, okay, well, we need to have this Saturday so more people can make it. Number one. Number two, we need to have this later in the day, which is why we had it from 1 to 3:30, because we had it before. It was from 12. It was from like 12 to 2 or something like that. All right. I think it was like 11. That was 11 to 1 or something similar to that, but we're having it later. All right. So that way more people can come up and more people can join in the conversation, because this is how stuff gets started properly. This is how stuff gets done properly, because we can't allow other people to be all like, hey, I formed this agenda. Okay. So you're having Amazon gift cards. Okay. We're going to give you guys bonnets. We're going to have a reparations packet with bonnets Amazon gift cards, because we know you guys like shopping at Amazon. We're going to give you guys Subway sandwiches. We're going to give you guys a gas card so you guys can put gasoline in your car. You know, gas is expensive. We're going to do that for you guys. This is why we're having this, because we're all like, no, you're going to sign the check we give you. You're not going to sign a check and say, here's your check. We're going to write the check out and you're just going to sign it. That's what we're doing with this. Okay. So, brothers and sisters, we got a lot of people in here. If you guys please subscribe if you have not done so, I greatly would appreciate that. We're really getting a lot of good momentum on the channel, a lot of good traffic on the channel. So that's a very, very positive thing. You know, it's a lot that needs to be discussed moving forward. We got a lot of good things coming up pretty soon. So this is why we want the channel to get as big as possible. So when we bring on special guests, when we have special interviews, when I go around formulating, recording different reparations conversations, we have as big of an audience as possible so the proper word and perspective can get out. So that's why it's important. So I appreciate every single last one of you guys. Especially shout out to the people who've contributed it financially. I was about to say donated it financially, but contributed it financially. I think I'm doubling that word, but it's okay. Shout out to every single last one of you all. Thank you very much for just the ones who watch, you know, ones who watch live, ones who watch on a playback. Thank you all so very much. I appreciate you all very, very much. All right. You guys should be following me because that's when I give my updates and all that stuff as far as the meetings, as far as all that stuff. On my social media pages, which is Afro Elite on Instagram and the Afro Elite on Twitter. And I have the links to those in the description. Okay, we have our sister Star. She's been, shout out to her. She's been putting a lot of the links up throughout the channel as well, too. All right, so you guys should be following me on my social media platforms. And with that being said, brothers and sisters, we had a pretty good conversation. We broke down what the Evenston agenda really is and why Roland Martin is co-signing that, because he's not giving no pushback. He's co-signing that because he know his people can pretty much get in on that, you know, so that's why. But with that, brothers and sisters, B1 salute to every single last one of you all. And of course, like always, you all have a good one.